Hey, Robbie Lockman here with Harness, and today we're going to be talking about a challenge that most organizations face. How do you standardize and also maintain innovation? Well, today we're going to look at 3 ways that the Harness platform helps you do that. So the first way the Harness platform helps you do that is with a new feature called pipeline governance. And to get the pipeline governance, go to the Harness platform and then go to continuous security and governance. And here, we're going to start adding a governance standard. So as we go about adding a pipeline governance standard, what exactly is a pipeline governance standard? Well, a pipeline governance standard is a conformance rule. And so basically, you're scoring something against these conformance rules to see how conformant a particular workflow is. So let's go ahead and create one. So let's create one called Golden Canary Standard. Let's have the description the same. And we're going to go ahead and add a particular rule or a conformance rule. And so what this is going to be, we're going to add a tag. And I'm going to have a tag called scale application. And so with scale app, basically we're looking at if our application it has the ability to scale, or during the workflow, there's a scale section of the deployment. Now, the application that I'm going to be using, again, it's the same application that we used in one of our previous blogs, or Pivotal Cloud Foundry, or PCF blog. And so we have an app resize step, and this will actually match. And so let's go ahead and click submit. And we'll go ahead and click submit on that. And so we have our Golden Canary standard. To turn it on, just toggle the switch to on. And now that the standard is enabled, let's go and make sure we can tag our workflow with that. To take a look at the application that we made before, let's go back to setup. And here we have PCF perfection. So let's click into it. Let's go ahead and tag the workflow with the scale app. So we take a look at our basic PCF workflow. As we can see here, there is a scale app or app resize section. So let's go ahead and say, okay, this particular workflow, by leveraging a tag, we have the scale app tag applied to it, since we are resizing or scaling the application. So click submit. So we know that this particular workflow has a scale application section, which is our app resize. The next step we want to do is, since we're scoring the pipeline, let's go back and create a particular pipeline. So if we go back to PCF perfection, let's go ahead and add a particular pipeline. So we don't have a pipeline, let's add one. So I'm going to call my pipeline the Golden Pipeline. Let's go ahead and add a particular pipeline stage. And so as we see here, the conformance section is ready to start scoring. But since we don't have a pipeline yet, or pipeline stage, let's go ahead and add one. So we're just going to call this maybe the first step. We're going to execute our basic PCF workflow, click submit, and perfect. Now our pipeline conformance score went up to 100 because our particular tag is there in the workflow. Fantastic. Now, having this pipeline governance is only one way that we have in the Harness platform to help you standardize your workflows. In the next section, we're going to be taking a look at templates. So to take a look at the template that you have available, click Setup and go to Template Library. So let's go ahead and make a template for the first time. So if you navigate to Add Template, let's make a shell script template. And let's call this Simple Template. We're going to be adding a bash script as a template. Let's go ahead and make this pretty simple. Let's go ahead and echo out our name. Now also, we can add a Harness input variable. So let's go ahead and add a variable called name. I'll make the default my name, Ravi. I'm going to say this is our first name that we're going to want to have to be part of a workflow if we input it. Now all we have to do is click submit, and this should be available to us in our template library. So we go back to template library, we should see that simple templates there. To add something that's been templated to our workflow, let's just go back to our workflow by going to setup, PCF perfection, and going to PCF, basic PCF. Now, as part of the setup, since this is pretty fun, this is going to echo out our name, I always say, hey, why don't we go ahead and add our stamp to our workflows? So click Add command, select from a shared template library, come back and say, here's our simple template, click link. Looks good to me. Let's click submit. And just like that, the simple template is actually now inside of our workflow. And when we execute this, we can actually see that this is being executed. So let's go ahead and execute this to see what happens. So click on the continuous deployment, Start new deployment. We're going to be deploying our PCF application again. Going back to our Golem pipeline, which is conformant. And let's go ahead and deploy the sample war. And let's say echo Robbie. This will go through and start the deployment. And as it's executing, our simple template has executed. And as we can see here, echoing, my name is Robbie. Now, as this deployment continues to go on, pushing to pivotal web services, you can really imagine the art of the possible. Not only can you execute shell scripts, but there's several other assets you can execute inside the Harness platform. So as this is finishing up, let's take a look at one other thing, our configuration as code. So with our configuration as code, we're able to do a bidirectional Git Sync. What does that mean? Well, if you notice, I had this tab open here throughout the first couple of pieces, which is a private GitHub repository. And so it's empty here. But what we're able to do with our configuration as code is actually store the harness configuration. If you don't know, the harness configurations are all backed in YAML. And so what we're going to do, we're going to be storing all our configuration tree or the harness tree into Git, or in this case, a private GitHub repository. And we're going ahead and going to make a few changes. And also a way of templating is actually cloning assets. So we're going to demonstrate that for you right now. So the first thing we need to get set up is actually a Get connector, which is a source code repository in terms of harness terms. So if you go back to the harness platform and click on setup, if you go to connectors, source code repos, let's go ahead and add a source code repo. We're going to be adding one, which is the Get connector. I'll just call this one Captain Canary. Give the URL here, which is get credentials. So I'm going to go ahead and log in with my username and password. With my username and password entered, go ahead and click test to make sure this is okay. Perfect. And go ahead and click submit. And now what we want to do is go back and navigate to our configurations code with this. So if we click on setup, we click on configuration as code. What we'd actually do is go ahead and click on these three ellipses here. And we're going to go ahead and set up our Git connector. So we're going to go ahead and set up Git Sync. Select the connector we just made. I don't have a particular branch, so if we go back to GitHub here, I only have one branch, which is master. So let's go ahead and just use master. And click submit to enable it. Once we set up our Git connector, we can actually go back to GitHub and see that our particular harness tree artifacts have been uploaded into GitHub. Fantastic. We're well on our way of setting up a bidirectional sync. The next thing we do need to get set up is that we need to set up a webhook notification. And so what this means is that if we do any sort of manipulation on the repository, let's say on a local client with Git or GitHub, if I clone a particular asset, that particular asset should come back into Harness and be available to the Harness platform. So to do that, the first thing we need to do is go to setup, go back to our Git connector. So we go back to connector and Captain Canary. If we look at Captain Canary, here's our webhook URL. Let's go ahead and copy this. So if one wasn't created for you when you generated the repository, there's a button here that says generate webhook. Let's click on that and one will be generated in a pop-up. It's always there if you need it back in the configuration. And so to enter that particular webhook, let's go back to Captain Canary. Let's go back to Captain Canary here. And then if you click on settings inside the repository, let's go ahead and add this particular webhook. So if you go and scroll down to webhooks, and then so if you don't have a particular webhook, let's add a webhook. And then let's go ahead and give that URL, which is our payload URL. Make sure we change this to application JSON because we'll be sending JSON. And all the defaults look okay. So I'll just go ahead and send everything and click add webhook. And now our repository is wired. And so the next step we have to do, let's go ahead and do some manipulations. So let's say I actually want to duplicate an entire harness application. Let's go ahead and just go for gold so see how this is actually done. So I want to go ahead and add our PCF perfection application back to our Git connector. So I'll go ahead and put this back in master. Click submit, make sure we have our connector enabled. Click submit, and this should be syncing with our Git repository. If you go back over, we'll see that our applications folder has been added. And now we can start doing Git manipulations. Let's go ahead and clone this and push this back up. We have a webhook already registered. And for me and for myself, I actually like to use the GitHub desktop client. Go ahead and fire up the GitHub desktop client. And let's go ahead and clone the repository we just made. The defaults look good. Click clone. And this should be bringing down the artifacts that we need. And so now we can start doing file level manipulation. If we navigate, let's say in Finder, to where the file was downloaded, we can actually go to our applications folder under the repository, setup, applications, and the application name. Let's go ahead and say we want to make a clone of PCF perfection. So we right click and we make copy. Let's go ahead and paste this in there. We'll just rename it. Let's say let's call it PCS prowess. And now we can use the get client to actually push this up. So let's switch back our view to the get desktop client. So let's grab the get desktop client. As we can see here that it's picked up on changes. And so let's go ahead and commit a change. So I'll say new prowess environment. And I go ahead for the commit. I'll just go ahead and copy and paste this in there. And so we're going to go ahead and make a particular commit to master. That's being pushed up. And now what we need to do is push this to origin. And so that should be pushed to our origin. And now if we go back and take a look at the applications folder here, we should see another application. So if we will see here, we have PCS Promise. Is now available to us on GitHub. If we navigate back to Harness, perfect. In our tree, we actually have PCF Promise, and here's where the big value is. If we go back to setup, here we have PCS Prowess. Now we did copy all the configurations, so the label will be the same here. But with that, we've just looked at 3 ways how Harness can help standardize your pipelines. It's always a very tricky to manage the radio dials between innovation and standardization. And with the Harness platform, we give you all the tools that you and your organization need to make very educated and very prudent moves into both to be helping out engineering efficiency. I hope that was valuable for you. And until next time, cheers, Robbie.